The morning started like any other on Earth. People went about their daily routines, sipping coffee, rushing to work, and checking their phones. No one knew that this ordinary Tuesday would mark the most extraordinary day in human history. At 9:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every satellite in Earth's orbit detected them. Massive ships, each larger than Manhattan, emerged from what looked like tears in the fabric of space itself. Their dark hulls blocked out the sun in many major cities, casting enormous shadows that turned day into dusk. Panic erupted in the streets as millions of people looked up at the impossible sight above them. Inside the largest vessel, Admiral Marcus stood on his command bridge, his tall frame reflected in the polished black floors. His gray uniform, decorated with the medals of 300 successful conquests, gleamed under the soft blue lights. He watched the primitive planet through the ship's viewing screens with an expression of mild amusement. "Another backward world," he said to his second-in-command, Officer Reed. "Look at them. They still used fossil fuels. Their most advanced vehicles can barely reach their own moon." He shook his head, allowing himself a small smile. "This will be conquest number 301, hardly worth noting in the Imperial records." On Earth, military bases worldwide scrambled their jets. The primitive aircraft, as Admiral Marcus called them, looked like toys compared to the massive Imperial ships. Nuclear missiles were prepared in their silos, a response that made the Imperial officers laugh. They had conquered worlds with far more advanced weapons than these. "Sir," Officer Reed reported, "their global communication networks are in chaos. Their military forces are mobilizing. But," he paused to chuckle, "their most powerful weapons wouldn't even scratch our secondary shields." Admiral Marcus nodded. "Standard procedure then. Give them the usual 24 hours to surrender. Show them our ship count." He turned to his tactical officer. "How many ships do we have in orbit now?" 10,247. "Admiral, the last battle group just arrived." The Admiral smiled. It was overkill, of course. He could have conquered this planet with just 10 ships. But Imperial protocol demanded an overwhelming show of force. It prevented unnecessary resistance and saved lives in the long run. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a secret facility unknown even to most government officials, Dr. James Walker watched the situation unfold with growing horror. Banks of monitors showed him everything. The massive fleet, the panic in the streets, the useless military response. But his eyes were fixed on one particular screen, showing energy readings from the alien ships. "No, no, no," he muttered, his hands shaking as he typed calculations into his computer. "The power outputs, they're too high. If they fire those weapons, and if Project Mirror is activated." He reached for his phone, desperate to warn someone, anyone who would listen. Above, Admiral Marcus prepared to address Earth. His image appeared on every screen, phone, and display device across the planet. He spoke in perfect English, his translation system automatically adapting his words for every language on Earth. "People of Earth, I am Admiral Marcus of the Imperial Fleet. Your world has been chosen to join our glorious empire. Your technology is primitive, your defenses inadequate. We offer you 24 hours to surrender and accept Imperial rule. Resist, and we will demonstrate our power in ways you cannot imagine. Choose wisely." The message ended, leaving billions in terrified silence. In military commands worldwide, generals and presidents debated their options. Their most powerful weapons seemed useless against these ships. How could they fight back? In his underground lab, Dr. Walker finally got through to military command. "Listen to me," he shouted into the phone. "Whatever you do, don't activate Project Mirror. The energy readings from their ships, it would cause a catastrophic." But the line went dead, and alarms began to blare throughout his facility. The 24-hour countdown had begun. Humanity's time as a free species was running out, or so Admiral Marcus thought. He had no idea that his greatest victory was about to become his most devastating defeat. Dr. Walker ran through the underground corridors of the research facility, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Sweat dripped down his face as he clutched a thick folder of data printouts. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow throughout the complex, making everything look like a scene from a nightmare. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he shouted into his phone as he ran. Project Mirror wasn't designed for this kind of power level. On the other end of the line, General Roberts of the Joint Chiefs remained unconvinced. "Dr. Walker," the general's voice was firm, "we have alien ships above every major city on Earth. They're threatening our entire species. If Project Mirror can reflect their energy weapons back at them, we need to use it." But that's just it. Walker burst into the facility's main control room, where dozens of scientists and military personnel worked at computer stations. "The energy readings from their ships are off the charts. If we activate the quantum field at planetary scale, the reflection effect won't just bounce back their weapons. It'll create a cascading loop." The massive screens on the control room wall showed live feeds from cities worldwide. The alien ships hung in the sky like dark mountains, their shadows creating an artificial night. 18 hours remained in Admiral Marcus's countdown, but military intelligence suggested he wouldn't wait that long. In orbit, aboard the Imperial flagship, Admiral Marcus reviewed the data from Earth's pathetic attempts at resistance. A few nations had already fired nuclear missiles at his fleet. The primitive weapons had dissolved harmlessly against their shields, not even causing a power fluctuation. "Prepare a demonstration," he ordered Officer Reed. "Target 3 small cities. Nothing too important. Show them what happens when they resist the Empire." Reed nodded and began selecting targets. Back in the underground facility, Dr. Walker spread his printouts across a conference table. Around him stood the facility's top scientists and military leaders. "Look at these numbers." He pointed to a series of calculations. "Project Mirror works by creating a quantum field that reflects energy. We designed it to protect against nuclear attacks, reflecting the blast force back at the source." He pulled up a computer simulation. "But these alien ships, the energy output from just one of their weapons is 1,000 times greater than what we tested for. If we create a planetary quantum field, and they fire at us." The simulation showed a cascading wave of energy, building and reflecting back and forth, until it became a catastrophic storm. "You're saying it would be too effective?" General Roberts asked, leaning over the table. "I'm saying it would be like creating a hall of mirrors, then lighting a sun inside it." Walker ran his hands through his gray hair in frustration. "The reflection effect would amplify their energy weapons exponentially. It would tear apart anything caught in the field, including their entire fleet." The room fell silent. On the screens above, they watched as 3 alien ships broke formation and moved into attack position over small cities in different parts of the world. "Maybe that's exactly what we need," said Colonel Turner, a hard-faced woman who'd been quietly observing. "They're about to attack civilian targets. If Project Mirror can destroy their fleet—" "You don't get it," Walker interrupted. "We're talking about 10,000 ships being destroyed simultaneously. The energy release would be unprecedented. We don't know what it might do to Earth's atmosphere, to our magnetic field." His words were cut off by bright flashes on the monitor. The alien ships had opened fire on their target cities. Beams of intense energy sliced through the air, heading for population centers below. "We're out of time." General Roberts grabbed his phone. "Project Mirror is our only option. God help us all." He began giving orders to activate the planetary defense system. Dr. Walker watched in horror as the machinery around them hummed to life. Years of his work, meant to protect humanity, was about to be used in ways he'd never intended. He could only hope that his calculations were wrong, that the quantum field wouldn't create the devastating chain reaction he feared. But deep down, he knew what was coming. The Empire's mighty fleet was about to learn a terrible lesson about the law of unintended consequences. Admiral Marcus watched with satisfaction as his ship's energy beams struck their targets. 3 small cities, one in Asia, one in Europe, and one in South America, vanished in blinding flashes of light. The demonstration would surely break Earth's will to resist. "Broadcast on all frequencies," he commanded. "Show them what just happened. Let them see the price of defiance." His lips curled into a cold smile. In 300 conquests, this tactic had never failed. But something was wrong. Officer Reed frowned at his instruments, tapping the screens in confusion. "Admiral, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the planet's surface. They're like nothing we've seen before." Deep underground, Project Mirror roared to life. Massive generators beneath every continent activated simultaneously, their combined power feeding into Dr. Walker's quantum field technology. The air around Earth began to shimmer with an invisible energy barrier. "You fools," Walker whispered, watching the power readings climb. "You've killed us all." He typed frantically at his computer, trying to shut down the system, but the military had locked him out. Around him, other scientists began noticing strange readings on their instruments. In orbit, Admiral Marcus's smile faded as his tactical officer reported more anomalies. The energy beams from his ships weren't dissipating after impact as they should. Instead, they seemed to be bouncing back. "Impossible," he muttered, moving closer to the main viewing screen. "Magnify those impact zones." The screen showed the destroyed cities, but around them, a strange distortion was spreading across the planet's surface like ripples in a pond. "Sir," Officer Reed's voice cracked with alarm. "The reflected energy. It's growing stronger. Our own weapons fire is coming back at us, but the power levels are 10 times higher." The first Imperial ship exploded without warning. It was one of the ships that had fired on the cities. Its own energy weapon, reflected and amplified by Project Mirror, cut through its shields like they weren't there. The explosion lit up the sky like a new sun. In the underground facility, the walls trembled. Dr. Walker and his team watched in horror as their instruments showed the quantum field growing stronger with each passing second. Every piece of energy it reflected was being amplified, creating more energy to reflect. "The cascade effect has begun," Walker announced grimly. "The field is using their own weapons against them, and it's getting stronger." He pointed to a graph on his screen, its line rising exponentially. Each explosion adds more energy to the field. It's a chain reaction now. Above Earth, Admiral Marcus finally understood the trap they'd stumbled into. "Ceasefire," he screamed into the fleet communications. "All ships, power down weapons immediately." But it was too late. 2 more ships exploded, their deaths feeding more energy into the growing quantum storm. The reflected energy beams began bouncing between ships, growing stronger with each reflection. Space itself seemed to be burning. "Full retreat," Marcus ordered, his voice shaking for the first time in his military career. "Get us out of here." But the quantum field had expanded beyond Earth's atmosphere. There was nowhere to run. Officer Reed worked desperately at his controls. "Sir, we can't break free. The field is holding us in place, using our own engine energy against us." Around them, more and more ships began to explode. In the facility below, Dr. Walker and his team could only watch. The quantum field had become self-sustaining, turning the Empire's overwhelming power into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. Screens showed the night sky lit up with endless explosions as ship after ship was torn apart by its own reflected energy. "Their power," Walker said quietly, "their absolute confidence in their superior weapons. That's what's destroying them. They never imagined their own strength could be turned against them." The ground shook constantly now as the energy storm raged above. In orbit, Admiral Marcus stood frozen on his bridge, watching his invincible fleet tear itself apart. His last thought, before his flagship erupted in a blinding flash, was a bitter appreciation of the irony. The Empire's greatest strength had become its fatal weakness, and a supposedly primitive planet had engineered their complete destruction. The sky burned. Thousands of Imperial ships exploded in a continuous chain reaction, each blast feeding more energy into Project Mirror's quantum field. From the ground, it looked like the stars were falling, a rain of fire and destruction that lit up the night brighter than day. In the underground facility, Dr. Walker and his team worked frantically to understand what was happening. Their instruments were nearly overloaded from the massive energy readings, and the concrete walls cracked from the constant vibrations. "The quantum field is growing stronger than we ever imagined possible," Walker explained to General Roberts, who stood watching the destruction on the main screens. "It's not just reflecting their energy weapons anymore. It's capturing and amplifying the power from every explosion, every ship's engine, every piece of technology they use." A junior scientist rushed up with new data printouts. "Dr. Walker, the field is affecting their shield technology too. When their shields try to block the reflected energy, the field absorbs that power and adds it to the reaction." Walker grabbed the papers, his face growing pale as he read. "This is worse than I thought. Their defensive technology is actually making things worse for them. Every attempt they make to protect themselves just adds more energy to the cascade." On the command ship's burning bridge, Admiral Marcus struggled to understand what was happening to his fleet. Half of his 10,000 ships were already destroyed, and the rest were being torn apart by invisible forces that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "It's impossible," he shouted, watching another battleship crack in half, its own energy shields seemingly turning inward to tear it apart. "They're primitives. They'd barely have space flight. How could they do this?" Officer Reed, his uniform covered in soot from electrical fires, looked up from a damaged console. "Sir, we're detecting some kind of quantum field effect. It's like the planet has turned itself into a mirror, but one that makes everything it reflects stronger." In the facility below, General Roberts watched the destruction with a mix of awe and horror. "How long will this continue?" he asked Walker. The scientist shook his head. "The field is self-sustaining now. Each ship they lose adds more energy to the reaction. Their own power is being used against them in an endless loop." He pointed to a diagram on his screen. "Look here. The field is actually learning and adapting. It's finding new ways to use their technology against them." Outside, survivors in the destroyed cities watched in amazement as pieces of alien ships began raining from the sky. The Imperial fleet, which had seemed so invincible just hours ago, was being systematically torn apart by forces they couldn't even see. "We never designed it to do this," Walker continued, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "Project Mirror was supposed to be a simple defensive shield, reflecting energy weapons away from Earth. But their technology, their power levels, they were so far beyond anything we imagined that they created something entirely new." A massive explosion rocked the facility. On the screens, they watched as one of the largest Imperial ships tried to escape, its engines burning at full power. But the quantum field caught the engine energy, reflected it, amplified it, and sent it back. The ship exploded with such force that it took out 20 others nearby. "You know what this means, don't you?" Colonel Turner said quietly. "After this, no one will ever dare attack Earth again. The more powerful they are, the more devastating their defeat will be." Walker nodded grimly. "We've created the ultimate defensive weapon, one that turns an enemy's strength against them. The more advanced they are, the more dangerous it becomes for them to attack us." General Roberts stared at the screens, watching another wave of explosions tear through the Imperial fleet. "So this is how humanity joins the galactic stage. Not by being the strongest or most advanced, but by being clever enough to make those things work against themselves," Walker finished. "Though I doubt anyone will believe the Empire was defeated by a simple mirror trick." Above them, the last of Admiral Marcus's mighty fleet was being torn apart by its own reflected power, a final testament to the dangers of underestimating a seemingly primitive world. Time seemed to slow down as humanity watched the destruction of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. The quantum field had turned Earth's atmosphere into a swirling, shimmering dome of energy that trapped and reflected every bit of power the Imperial ships tried to use. Admiral Marcus's command ship spun helplessly in the chaos, its once mighty engines now working against it. Every attempt to power up the engines resulted in that energy being reflected back, amplified, and used to push the ship in the opposite direction. Everything we try makes it worse. Officer Reed screamed over the sound of failing systems. Our weapons are useless, our shields are failing, and even our emergency systems are being turned against us. The Admiral stood at his viewing window, watching his fleet die. Ships exploded everywhere he looked, each blast creating new waves of destructive energy that the quantum field caught and redirected. The scenes before him defied everything he knew about warfare and technology. "Send a message to the Empire," he ordered, his voice trembling. Tell them to never attack this world. The humans don't have advanced weapons. They have something far worse. His words were cut off as his ship's power core overloaded. The quantum field had reflected its own energy back into it so many times that the containment systems failed. The massive command ship erupted in a ball of blue fire that consumed 30 nearby vessels. Down in the facility, Dr. Walker and his team watched their instruments in amazement. "The field is evolving," he explained to the military leaders. "It's not just reflecting energy anymore. It's learning from each ship it destroys. Every new piece of Imperial technology it encounters makes it stronger and more adaptive." On one screen, they watched as an Imperial ship tried to use its teleportation technology to escape. The quantum field caught the attempt, copied the energy pattern, and used it to tear the ship apart from the inside out. "Their own technology is teaching us how to destroy them," Colonel Turner observed, her eyes wide. "Everything they try becomes a new weapon we can use against them." General Roberts pointed to another screen showing a group of Imperial ships attempting to combine their shields. "Look there, what's happening to those ships?" Walker studied the readings. "They're trying to create a stronger defense by linking their shields together." "But the field," he shook his head in wonder. "The field is using their shield connection as a pathway. Their defensive network is becoming a conduct for their own destruction." Outside, people emerged from their shelters to watch the light show in the sky. The Imperial fleet, which had arrived as an unstoppable force of conquest, was now a spectacular display of destruction. Each explosion lit up the night sky like fireworks, casting strange shadows across the landscape. In orbit, the few surviving Imperial ships desperately tried to escape, but the quantum field had spread too far, creating a massive energy net that caught and held anything trying to flee. Their struggles only added more power to the field, making it stronger and more inescapable. "We've created something entirely new," Walker said quietly, watching the final phase of destruction. "This isn't just a defensive system anymore. It's a perfect mirror of their own power, turned back against them. The more they fight, the stronger it becomes." The facility shook as another wave of explosions rocked the sky. The quantum field had reached its peak power, using the energy from thousands of destroyed ships to create a swirling vortex of destructive force that consumed everything in its path. "Look at the energy readings," a young scientist called out. "The field is starting to contract. It's running out of ships to destroy." Walker nodded. "Once there's no more enemy energy to reflect and amplify, it should begin to dissipate. The mirror only shows what's in front of it, and soon there will be nothing left to reflect." They watched in silence as the last few Imperial ships succumbed to their own reflected power. The mighty invasion force that had threatened Earth just hours ago was being erased from existence, destroyed by the very power they had trusted to bring them victory. The irony was not lost on anyone. The most advanced fleet in the galaxy, defeated by a simple principle of physics. Everything they sent out would come back to them, stronger than before. The quantum field pulsed with blinding light as the last major groups of Imperial ships fought their final battle. Not against Earth, but against their own reflected power. The sky had become a graveyard of burning metal and shattered technology. Admiral Marcus's flagship, once the pride of the Imperial fleet, drifted in pieces. Its mighty hull had been split open by its own weapons, reflected back 100-fold. In its broken bridge, the Admiral lay dying, watching his mighty armada destroy itself. Send the last message, he gasped to Officer Reed, who worked at the only functioning console. Warn them all. With trembling hands, Reed activated the emergency quantum transmitter, broadcasting directly to the Empire's capital world. The message was simple: Earth is death. Their defense turns strength against itself. Do not follow us. Do not seek revenge. 10,000 ships, gone in hours. The stronger the attack, the worse the destruction. Earth is forbidden. In the underground facility, Dr. Walker and his team worked desperately to understand what their creation had become. The quantum field had evolved far beyond its original design, turning into something that seemed almost alive. It's not just reflecting anymore, Walker explained, pointing to his screens. It's hunting. Look, it's actively seeking out sources of energy to reflect and amplify. Any technology above a certain power threshold becomes a target. They watched as a group of Imperial rescue pods tried to escape the destruction. The small vessels, despite their minimal power signatures, were caught in the field's grasp. Their emergency engines flared briefly before the reflected energy tore them apart. "We have to shut it down," General Roberts said, watching the continuing destruction. "The field is too powerful, too unpredictable." But Walker shook his head. "We can't. It's self-sustaining now. The only way it will stop is when there's nothing left powerful enough to reflect. We just have to wait until." His words were cut off by a massive explosion that shook the entire facility. On the main screen, they watched as the largest remaining Imperial ship attempted one final desperate attack. They had overloaded their main reactor, trying to create an explosion powerful enough to break through the quantum field. Instead, the field caught the massive energy release, amplified it, and reflected it back in a devastating wave that consumed everything in its path. The explosion created a ripple effect through the quantum field, causing chain reactions among the remaining ships. "My God," Colonel Turner whispered, watching the devastation. "Their final attack just made everything worse. They still don't understand. The more power they use, the stronger the reflection becomes." The facility's sensors were overwhelmed by the readings. The quantum field had reached its peak intensity, creating a swirling vortex of energy that lit up the sky like a second sun. Debris from destroyed ships rained down through the atmosphere, creating streaks of fire across the horizon. The atmospheric readings, a scientist called out in panic. "The heat from all these explosions, it's affecting our weather patterns." Walker rushed to check the data. The massive energy releases had indeed begun to impact Earth's atmosphere, creating strange weather phenomena. Storm clouds formed and dissipated rapidly, and aurora-like lights danced across the sky even at the equator. "The field is protecting us," he realized, studying the patterns. "It's reflecting most of the heat and radiation back into space. It's not just defending against attacks, it's shielding us from the consequences of the destruction." They watched in awe as the quantum field began to pulse with a new rhythm, creating a protective barrier that blocked the worst effects of the catastrophe happening above. The very system that had caused such destruction was now preventing that destruction from harming Earth. As the last Imperial ships broke apart in the sky, Admiral Marcus's final message reached the Empire. The response was immediate. All Imperial forces were ordered to mark Earth's solar system as absolutely forbidden territory. The humans hadn't just defeated an invasion. They had created a defense so terrifying that no advanced civilization would dare attack them again. The catastrophe was complete. Humanity had emerged victorious, but the price of victory was written across their skies in burning wreckage and reflected fire. Dawn broke over a changed Earth. The quantum field had finally begun to fade, its swirling energies dissipating now that there were no more powerful technologies left to reflect. The sky, which hours ago had been filled with alien ships, now contained only scattered debris and the last traces of shimmering energy. Dr. Walker stood on a hillside near the research facility, watching rescue teams collect pieces of Imperial technology that had survived the destruction. The morning sun caught the metallic fragments, making them sparkle like diamonds against the scorched earth below. "We should be celebrating," Colonel Turner said, joining him on the hill. "We just defeated the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But somehow, it doesn't feel like a victory celebration." Walker nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The scale of destruction had been beyond anything they'd imagined. The quantum field had performed its job too well, creating a catastrophe that would be remembered for centuries. "The final count is in." General Roberts approached them, holding a tablet. "The Empire lost 10,247 ships, over 3 million alien crew members, all because they thought we were too primitive to have real defenses." In orbit, specially equipped satellites recorded the aftermath. A ring of debris now circled Earth, the remains of what had been the mightiest fleet ever assembled. Teams of scientists were already planning missions to study the wreckage, hoping to learn from the advanced technology that had survived. "The quantum field changed everything," Walker explained, pointing to new readings on his handheld device. "It didn't just destroy their fleet. It learned from every ship it destroyed. Earth's atmosphere is now permanently altered. We have a thin, invisible layer of quantum energy surrounding the planet." "Is it dangerous?" Turner asked, looking up at the sky with concern. Walker shook his head. "No, it's actually protecting us. Think of it as a passive early warning system. If any advanced technology approaches Earth with harmful intent, the remaining quantum energy will detect it, like an immune system remembering a previous threat." Back in the facility's main control room, scientists from around the world worked to understand what had happened. The data they'd collected during the battle was revolutionary, showing them new principles of physics they'd never imagined. "We've already received messages from 17 different alien civilizations," General Roberts announced, reading from his latest report. "They all say basically the same thing. They want peace, trade, and above all, they want to know how a primitive world defeated the Imperial fleet." Walker couldn't help but smile at the irony. "We didn't beat them with superior technology. We beat them by turning their own superiority against them. The more advanced they were, the more dangerous our defense became." On screens around them, news reports showed celebrations breaking out worldwide. Humanity had faced its first major alien threat and emerged victorious. But there was also a solemnness to the celebrations, a recognition of the enormous loss of life, even if those lives had belonged to would-be conquerors. "The Empire's surviving colonies are in chaos," Turner reported, checking her communications. "Without their fleet, without their core world's leadership, they're breaking apart. We didn't just defend Earth. We accidentally ended the largest empire in the galaxy." Walker walked to a window, looking out at the crews cleaning up debris from the battle. "We've changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Earth isn't just some primitive backwater anymore. We're the world that proved technology isn't everything. That cleverness and understanding can defeat even the most overwhelming force." "And what do we do now?" General Roberts asked, joining him at the window. "Now," Walker replied, watching as a piece of Imperial hull was lifted onto a truck, "we learn. We study their technology, not to copy it, but to understand it. Because the next threat might be different. The quantum field was our mirror. Now we need to be ready for whatever else is out there." The sun climbed higher in the sky, its light catching the quantum energy that still shimmered faintly in the atmosphere. Earth had survived its first interstellar war, not through overwhelming force or advanced technology, but through the clever application of basic physics. It was a lesson the galaxy would not soon forget. The age of Earth's isolation was over. The planet had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, by proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply turning an enemy's strength against itself.